I am Tiffany. I work for the California After School Network. A lot of you, I'm so thankful to say that I've already met in some form or fashion throughout the state. And if I haven't, I promise you we'll try to make that, we'll try to shift that, right? Um, we're going to spend our time together today, y'all, really, first and foremost, saying thank you to you all for the work that you do and the work that you've done. In the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of the racial unrest, in the midst of a country really trying to redefine and find itself, our field has been an exemplar. The way that you all have stepped up, the way that you have shown up, not just for kids, but for families and full communities, has been amazing. We really want to spend a lot of our time today celebrating that, right? We're going to have conversations from a national level where the research has finally caught up and acknowledges all the amazing work that we know we do. The fact that we build relationships and therefore children learn, the data is starting to say that. We're going to spend some time reflecting as a state about all of the amazing things. As some of you know, um, Michael Funk, the director for expanded learning for CDE, he's been doing these fireside chats, and we've really been trying to spotlight the amazing work that has been happening, even when we weren't sure what could happen, right? That our field really tried to be responsive and not reactive, and you all showed up with love and compassion and really tried to do what was best for kids at every moment. Um, we're then going to spend some time where you guys get to go into the open space. It's going to be a new thing for some, but what we love about it is it cultivates the wisdom in the room, right? One of the things that if you've ever been to a workshop that me or my very tall friend Troy do, you know that we say we believe that the wisdom is in the room. Sometimes our work is to give you language so that you can share that wisdom with others. Sometimes it's just for you to start being able to have someone hear you and know that your experiences are true and that you are doing the best work possible, right? So the open space is going to give us time for that. We're going to be able to elevate things that you've learned, lessons that you've painfully learned too during these last few months. But we're also going to hear some wins. We want you to come through with how have you really been able to support families during this really critical time? What are some of the ways that you became really innovative as either an individual or a program or an organization? That's what we want to really lift. But then we also want to hear what are your concerns, right? What are the questions that you have so that we as a greater system can actually be of support to you and with you. Um, so I guess for me, I just wanted to say once again, thank you all for the work that you do. We are here to simply be of support. We're here to remove barriers, and we are here in every single way to acknowledge that the work that you've done in the last few months has helped to remove that barrier that used to be the bell from the school, the regular school day to after school. That's not there anymore. The way that we're able to work together to support kids throughout this K 12 system has been incredible, and you guys have led the way with that. So I want to bring on Mr. Michael Funk. Michael, can you turn on your camera? And we're going to let him say a few words. Good morning, sir. How you doing?
Morning, Tiffany. Yes, I can turn on my camera. I've learned that skill on Zoom. I just can't unmute myself at the right time.
I think that's everybody's challenge. But I'm going
Yeah.
to mute myself now. We're going to give you the floor.
Yeah, it looks like we're almost up to 500. We've got more people coming in. But thank you, Tiffany, for a wonderful startup and welcome. And your energy is just exemplar of how expanded learning shows up in spaces and in the rooms. So for those of you that have not, we're supposed to be getting together in 3 different locations across the state, filling up a room with ourselves and our energy and seeing each other face to face. And here I am staring at a green dot on my screen instead of seeing all of you. But we're gonna do this. We are expanded learning. And if you were part of the summits in the past, or if you're part of any meeting here with CAN or the Department of Education, you know that part of our journey in the last 3-4 years has been paying careful attention to how we show up and being responsible for how we show up and being present, fully present. Many of you are coming from a busy morning, possibly children in the house, doing distance learning, perhaps facilitating some kind of distance learning arrangement for students you're working with, coming from a lot of different places, a lot of energy, a lot of stress. There's still so much uncertainty about what's going to happen as schools reopen. So we're just going to take really just a minute, and we're probably, as the practice we've done in the other in-person summits in the past, we have started off with a moment of mindfulness and reflection. But today, the focus is, the purpose is to help you be ready and be present for what the universe has for you today. We're going to offer a lot of things to you, a lot of conversations, a lot of different leaders and humans, ranging from amazing youth leaders all the way to our state superintendent of public instruction. What you receive from this will be what you are open to receive. As much as possible, I would encourage you to not try to multitask with a whole bunch of email and different phone conversations while this is going on, but as much as possible, be open, be a vessel to receive. And to that end, I'm inviting you just to take a moment. We're going to take 1 minute and just kind of sit straight or stand, whatever feels good to you. Take a deep breath in, slow breath out. My daughter Janae is in 4th grade. When they were doing school in person, they did yoga and meditation every morning. And the mantra was, smell the cookies, blow out the candles. Smell the cookies. Whatever's competing for your attention, whatever's on your to-do list, whatever's causing you stress, don't try to get rid of it. Don't try to solve it. Just gently place it next to you. It'll be there. It's not going to go away, but you can choose to be here. Smell the cookies. Blow out the candles. Just 15 seconds without me talking. Just settle in, be present, come here. Thank you. Normally on a Zoom, I can see your faces, at least some of you, as many as you fit on the screen, but I can't today. So I'm going to trust you here. I'm going to trust you're present. Together we rise. What an inspiring, inspiring theme for today's conference. And I trust that we now are together, all of us here representing expanded learning. In just a moment, I'll invite Karen Pittman to turn on her camera, but before I do, Karen Pittman is a prophetic voice in our field and has been for decades. And by prophetic, I mean one who tells the truth, one who guides the way. And it was no more true when she was so influential in my journey in the early 90s, when I was a youth worker and community worker in San Francisco. Had left the ministry to start a small nonprofit organization and had been a youth worker all my life, teacher, coach, youth minister, different settings. And in the 90s, Karen founded, as part of the Academy for Educational Development, she founded the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research and the National Training Institute for Community Youth Work. And I remember when I first saw this youth development framework from Karen, it was a moment of clarity where that is what I believe in. Now I see in words what I've given my life to. And it's fairly simple, but it is also, for those of you that are newer to the work, you might not know what the Positive Youth Development Framework is, but its DNA is part of our quality standards. Its DNA is part of social emotional development. Its DNA is the DNA of our work. And it's that if we provide the right supports and opportunities to young people. In fact, if we provide the right supports and opportunities to humans, they will thrive and become all they can be. Such a powerful framework, the asset-based framework. Karen went on to work in the Clinton White House. For those of you that have been working a while, you might remember America's Promise for Youth with General Colin Powell. Karen was the co-founder and architect of that initiative, which was also based on the Positive Youth Development Framework. She went on to co-found the Forum for Youth Development, and has been, you've probably seen her speak on a webinar, you've probably seen an article, you've probably read a book, but Karen has been guiding the way, and for me personally and for our field, and I'm very proud to welcome Karen Pittman to join me in this virtual space.
Great, I am joining you. Hope you can hear me. It says I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. So I hope we can fix that soon so you can see my mouth moving. And it's probably because I came in the wrong door or something, but hopefully we can get that fixed. But I am really, really delighted to be here and hope you can see me even though I can't see you. And Michael, thank you for the kind words. They were, you know, I have continued all these years to get energy for the work that I do by staying connected to the people who do the work. And you're one of those leaders. And so it's always a pleasure. And I always try to say yes whenever you call. Let me, still not there. Oh, there I am. Great. Wonderful. Okay. So now you can see me.
Welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
So glad to have you. So we're going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then Karen's actually going to come back with us later in the afternoon and join a panel, or actually moderate a panel for us later on. But Karen, we chatted briefly late last week about some of the direction we may go. And I just want to start off, I remember this cartoon illustration that was at the start of an article about systems work. And it was two fish swimming in the ocean. And one fish says to the other, "How's the water?" And the other fish says, "What's water?" When we're swimming in our own pool, we don't often have the context. And that's, you know, in California, we have a very unique, setting for expanded learning work, and the scope and scale of the initiatives that we have. You have the bigger picture, both nationally and internationally. I'd just like to ask you, when you, from that broader perspective, take a look at what you see in California, what stands out to you?
Well, two of the words that you just said stand out, and I think stand out for most people, and that's scope and scale. For a state the size and complexity of California, for you to have really moved these ideas so thoroughly across the state, And not just scale, but I would also use the word saturation. It's not just that they pop up occasionally in every county or every district. You have really systematically figured out how to have it really infused into the way people think, into the way the systems work together. And that's unusual in any state. And it's certainly unusual, again, in a state the size and complexity of California. But for me, what stands out more than the fact that you've sort of gotten the scope and scale is the intentionality and the persistence that got you there. I think lots of folks look at California and say, oh, but it's California. Yes, it's California. And there are many enabling factors that happen over the years that allow California to always move forward in ways that other states have constraints. But the underlying thing that I have appreciated so much about the decades in which I have been watching what's happening in California and sometimes participating and trying to help what's happened has really been the persistence of using this youth development approach and never moving away from that North Star. Even as policy shifts changed, even as funding sources changed, there was always a growing core group of people who said, this is the way we need to work with our young people. And we're not going to back away from this. We're going to use opportunities when they come. We're going to fall back when they're not there. We're going to stand strong and not sway, even if it means different things. And so watching the way California was able, for example, to use the after school dollars that came with 21st Century and use that movement, but not be swayed, as a lot of folks were, to sort of go over to the side of, we will figure out how to lead with academics. You didn't do that. Even hanging on to the language of expanded learning has been important. And so I think the message that I want to give you all, and Tiffany, you started with this at the beginning, is that North Star of saying, we understand that every young person has potential. We understand that we as adults can create environments in which young people can thrive, and that that's our responsibility with whatever resources we're given. That's how we're going to judge ourselves. That has been the thing that has stayed true in California over the years, and I think the thing that has led to your success. So I'll join you and Tiffany in just celebrating the folks on the call to say thank you for hanging in there and thank you for staying true to the vision.
And it has been decades of work, as you stated, Karen. You know, I've heard so many times exactly what you said. Well, that's California. But I remember over 25 years ago now, when we were several advocates across the state were advocating for state funding that paralleled the 21st Century federal funds. And there wasn't any state funding. And yet there were, without the infusion of state funding, there was Sacramento Start, San Diego 6 to 6, LA's Best,
That's right.
San Francisco Beacon Initiative, and many others that I'm missing out, where local people inspired and committed to this notion of youth development and supporting the assets and community assets, worked locally to initiate these things. And so there's a lot of giants we're standing on the shoulders of right now that has led to this notion where we're now at 4,500 programs. So Karen, well, 4,500 programs, quality standards, over 900,000 kids, 30,000 staff. That influences the rest of the youth development world that's not tied to this funding too, this larger ecosystem of people that are not tied into this state-funded after-school expanded learning network. And of course, expanded learning means very different things in other parts of the country, which the folks on this Zoom might not know, but we could go down that path. But I think what I want to talk about now with you is the role of expanded learning during this time of COVID, during the pandemic. We've been very intentional, and I can guarantee you everyone on this in this conference today has been involved in fighting for and exercising the flexibility that we've provided for expanded learning programs to meet youth and communities where they are in this moment and not be concerned about the time or the place. And you've been an inspiration, Karen, to me in saying, while after school means a whole lot to parents and the public in terms of the meaning of our work, within the educational system and within the youth serving framework of across all sectors, it is a time and a place. And that doesn't always serve us well because you've always been about the approach. What I've observed as our programs look at how they partner with K-12 districts, it's obvious that humans across the planet, but in our communities, understand that youth more than ever need our social emotional support. They need our love. They need our care. I believe that's where all humans start in terms of this compassion about what the stress that families and kids are going through. And yet, when I look at the system, when I look at the educational system, I see most energy going to how are we going to get the instructional minutes to children, and how long are teachers going to be on camera. So while the humans start from the right place, the system quickly takes us to an institutional response to a human need. We talked a bit about that last Friday. Can you talk about that tension between the human response and the institutional response?
Yeah, I would love to. I think we're at a point in time where we've got a convergence of the pandemic and the multiple pandemics that are just sort of demonstrating the need to think differently about what it means to support learning, and a huge infusion of ways to practically sort of bring the science of how learning happens to the forefront to have these conversations. So I won't try to share screens at the moment, but happy to send this out. What we've been doing with folks who really have been looking across neuroscience and the learning sciences and everything to talk about this, how learning happens and the science of learning and development, is really to recognize that there are just 5 non-negotiables that help us optimize a learning environment in which we're co-creating experiences with young people. And that idea of co-creating is really important. The first and foremost one is relationships, is really developmentally supportive relationships, followed by making sure we've created environments where trust and belonging are at the forefront. And you can't do that just by assuming it. You actually have to make sure that you're asking young people whether they feel like they belong and whether they feel like they are trusted, because we know if young people don't feel emotionally safe and they don't feel socially accepted, they're going to shut down. No matter how high quality the learning is, it's not going to sink in. So relationships, belonging, then we really have to make sure we're providing integrated supports. And that starts with just getting to know the young person well enough to know what else they might need beyond what's in that room with you, and figuring out how to make sure you can do that in the best integrated way. Then we add in intentionality, which we've learned over the past couple of years, to building those critical skills and mindsets and knowledge bases. The intentionality to sort of name and help young people practice what they need to know to be able to go out and have a sense of identity and a sense of agency. And then finally, from a learning perspective, we make sure that all that is happening in the context of some kind of rich content, some kind of knowledge or experience that we want young people to have that ideally follows their interests, but at least is of high quality. So we go around that: relationships, trust and belonging, integrated supports, really intentional effort to focus on critical skills and knowledge building, and then the infusion of good, high quality content, instructional content of any way. The challenge that we've always had, if I use that sort of, we have this thing we call a blue wheel. The challenge that we've had is that schools, by design, start at the end. They start with the instructional content. And then we hope that teachers who have the time and space and skill create the rest. And that is that human part. But we get a huge amount of variation in how skilled teachers can be to squeeze the rest of that in when the content is mandated and when the formula for how to deliver the content is so locked down. When we come out here into the youth development world, into community programs and after school programs, et cetera, we start with relationships. But we don't start with relationships just because we believe it. We start with relationships because we tend to be voluntary programs. Young people and their families have to choose to be a part of us. So we have to lead with the relationships and with the trust and the belonging in order to make sure that we have young people there. Schools get you by mandate. So I don't want us to set up youth organizations are better than schools, et cetera. Two different sets of accountability. But the accountability on the youth program side really starts with the idea that we are accountable to young people and their families to create experiences that they want to join into. And so where we are right now, I think, with the huge amount of disruption that's happened, is that it was very clear that when school was narrowly defined as that last slice in the pie, that instructional content, and the first response was, how do we get the instructional content virtual? Not how do we use whatever technology we have to check in with young people and see if they're okay and find out what they need and see if they need extra supports and check on how they're doing and using their skills. We saw that failed. We saw that in some places, 30–40% of young people, especially adolescents, didn't log in at all. We didn't meet them where they were. So we have a huge opportunity right now to really rethink what we mean by expanded learning, that it doesn't just mean expanding time and place, as you said, not just where and when learning happens. We're now really having to rethink how and why and with whom learning happens. And we can be a much more active and organized part of that conversation. And again, in California, you are a more active and organized part of that conversation in some ways because you've kept the how, why, and with whom pieces of that expanded learning formula more to the forefront than others have.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. As you spoke, I'm thinking of this kind of old, worn out, tired mental model that those of us in after school or expanded learning have carried with us for quite some time. And that's looking at the K-12 education system and explaining why we're better or why we're more closer to kids or, whatever the narrative is. And the old tired mental model is that these two systems looking at each other versus being like this. And I think maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago at the Boost conference in my State of After School town hall, I used the framework time, temptation, and truth. Now's the time to state who we are. Stop being tempted to tell the school we can do things we don't do well and tell the truth about what we do well, right? And we chatted briefly last week about we're so used to kind of being hat in hand in front of school officials because we were taught that alignment is, it was deep in the 21st century CCLC narrative, like align with the school day. And some of us, especially during No Child Left Behind, were kind of saying, why would we want to align with that? And yet we had also some generalized disparaging notions of what was happening to kids in classrooms, and sometimes placing that upon teachers when in fact the system was forcing teachers to do a lot of things that they never got into teaching to do in the first place.
Right.
Right. And so, but here we're at this moment where all of a sudden we've got informal and formal educators working side by side during the same time because of COVID and the pandemic. And I think we have an opportunity here to lead with our strength, an asset-based approach for ourselves, to see ourselves as a strength in the solution, and to be clear about articulating to the educational system what we bring and what we bring well. So Karen, if you were talking to a school principal about what the role expanded learning could be, what our strength is, and how we could be part of the support and healing for young people and their learning, not their time for education, but their learning, what would you say?
Well, I'll tell you what I have said. And so far, it at least gets people pausing. And I think that's a good start. And that is to ask, before I get them talking about what can happen outside of their building, to ask the question, are you understanding all of the opportunities for learning and all of the places where learning is happening in your building during the school day? So if I move outside of the classroom, let's say we go to a middle school, I move outside of the classroom and I follow that young person through the day. They're in the hallways, they're in the cafeteria, they're in the library, they're in the nurse's office, they may be in the principal's office, they're in the bathrooms, they're on the soccer field. They are in lots of places with lots of other adults who are not that classroom teacher. We can even break the classroom teachers down into those who are teaching core academic subjects, in which there's much more determination about what and how they teach, and those who are teaching electives, art, music, etc. When you stop to get this down from that school, a building, this is out of school, often called community, and you ask, let's name the settings where young people and adults may be coming together in some kind of predictable way. And what opportunities do we have? Thinking about those 5 non-negotiables, what opportunities do we have to optimize those settings? And who are all those people who are standing around? And have we actually even invited them to tell us whether they have relationships with our young people, to tell us whether they're providing any supports with our young people, to tell us whether they notice whether young people have these critical skills and are encouraging them or discouraging them? Have we included them? So, you know, if you've got buses, we can start with the bus drivers and go back and forth. But when you just pause and get the conversation down to the adults and the settings and the young people and ask, how do we optimize the mix of what's happening in that particular setting to get us to good experiences? Did I just lose you all?
You're here. You're with us, Karen.
Here, I don't know. My camera disappeared for a second. That gives people a way to think and to go, wow, half the people in our school building are not the classroom teachers. And many of those are actually folks who are coming into our building from other systems and settings. They're coming in from health, they're coming in, if they're our security people may not be our employees. We've got city year, we've got other folks coming in, we have after school providers, expanded learning providers in our building. All of these are people that we count in the school community, but we haven't paused to ask what their role is in learning and development. So I start there, because if we can get them recognizing the role that the other adults have beyond teachers, we can get the humanity that you talked about back into the conversation. And we can get, so we have this, you know, we have school, and then we have this vague school climate. And all of those people somehow are contributing to the school climate, but we haven't gotten very specific about how to optimize their roles and how to optimize those settings. If we can get that conversation going, then it's a lot easier to see how those settings replicate themselves out in our communities, replicate themselves in a level of intentionality in the programs that we're putting together, replicate those selves very intentionally in the hubs that you all just created in San Francisco. So we can get the conversation down to the adults and the settings and recognize that in those settings, young people mix and match themselves differently into different sizes of groupings. They're not all age and ability grouped when they come into the cafeteria. That's a different kind of an opportunity for learning and developing and practicing skills. Somehow pushing that conversation down to that sort of point of service where co-creation of experiences happens helps us break down the boundaries between school and out of school.
I really appreciate that notion of that, having a conversation about all of the humans in the mix, all of the adults from wherever they're at, and the kids. I've said on our fireside chats, we have a responsibility. Every child in every family deserves our best, everyone. And yet, when we look at just like this K-12 system in a box, you know, are there enough people to meet those individual needs of children? And I come back to, if we take a community approach, there are enough humans in every community to give love and care and attention to each child. And when you talked earlier, Karen, about knowing the children well enough to know their unique needs, that's one of the pillars of community schools. It's one of the elements of youth development. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you had me come and do a plenary panel at your Stellar Ready by 21 conference. And it was the first time that I watched your keynote and saw the illustration of children trying to watch a baseball game with children of different physical stature, different heights. And you were trying to make the point that equality versus equity, that giving every child a box it's not equity. So children need different supports to be able to see. And then you even advocated to the point of taking down the fence. Well, I think that illustration has been used widely now across the country and across the planet. Probably most everyone has seen that illustration used in some form. So I want to pivot to this notion of social justice and equity in this moment, and knowing that our systemic racism, and there's some tension around this in our country, obviously. So I'm not trying to go there, but I'm just saying there's a reason while Black and brown students have been unable to close the achievement gap. Some are advocating maybe it's the wrong gap. And I'm wondering, Karen, when you think of equity and we think of what our children need, and this notion of every child needs to belong, and every child needs to be known. When I think about equity, I boil it down to these, that's a really distilled notion of equity for me, that every human feels like they belong and that they're known. What role and what is the unique opportunity for expanded learning in this quest for every child to be known and seen?
That's a great question. And I'm actually in the middle of writing an article that'll be a part of a book on the learning and development ecosystem with folks like Hal Smith from the National Urban League and David Osher from the American Institutes for Research, that really sort of has the title, Why Narrow Definitions of Learning contribute to inequity and how after school can help. In this case, the book is entitled Out of School, so I had to go with out of school. So my answer to that is, when our young people are in school, when all of our young people are in school, they are in a system that is operating with a narrower definition of learning than we know is what human learning and development is about. It has been narrowed down to overly emphasize academics. It has been narrowed down to present learning as linear when it isn't. It has been narrowed down in all kinds of ways, and we'll send you the list later on because we can keep talking. But you understand that we're in a system in which not only is the definition of learning narrowed, the definition of learning has been narrowed and intentionally directed towards making sure that those young people who are privileged by race and class have an easier time conforming to that definition. So there's always going to be a gap. And then on top of that, the way our system works, as soon as you don't conform to the definition of learning, rather than giving you more supports to accelerate your progress, we go the other direction. So we don't have to we can have a longer conversation about the educational system. But I think what we have an opportunity to do now, and it's an opportunity that the education system is embracing. So I'm really this conversation that educators, certainly teachers, principals, administrators, educational researchers, et cetera, are really coming back to push on the idea that we've got so many things baked into how we currently manage our education systems that go against what we know about learning and development. that we actually have to stand up against them. Where I think we have an opportunity, and especially now that COVID has created these opportunities for us to break the walls down and work together, we really do have an opportunity as the expanded learning youth development people to bring our research to the table, not just bring our experiences and our anecdotes to the table, but to bring our data to the table, to bring our research to the table, and to say, we know that when young people are experiencing the kind of learning settings that we create, we know that learning happens. And we know that, yes, learning happens in a way that supports their academic success, but we also know that the connection between that is that they have had consistent experiences in which they feel accepted, they feel belonging, they feel seen and known. Those experiences are building their confidence, those experiences are building their competencies, and they're then able to transfer those competencies back into other environments, including but not limited to school, that may not be as supportive, but they are now resilient enough to be able to succeed in those environments. We've got to be able to do a better job of explaining what we now know, what science now tells us, which is that learning is social and emotional. It starts with how you feel about where you are. And if we don't do that, it makes sense. So we've been playing with how to participate in the important conversations about social and emotional learning, while also honoring the fact that we're not just trying to put the burden again on young people to build skills and competencies that help them conform better to the school environment, but we really are trying to help them build skills and competencies that allow them to transform themselves, transform their communities, and actually critique the environments that they're in so that they are a part of the change process. So the folks at CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning, are talking about transformative SEL as something that's really important. We can broaden that to talk about transformative learning and development, which is really about optimizing the learning experience so that learning happens in a way that young people take the competencies, take the content, have a sense of being able to figure out who they are and how they become agents for themselves and collective agents and take it out into other places. And we have to combine that with a more robust sense of equity. So the graphic that you described, we actually amended it to not be the standard graphic in which you had young people looking over a fence and the young people were different sizes, so they needed different boxes. We actually kept the young people the same, had the fence tilted up, had the ground tilted down, and basically said, here's our challenge. We can't give young people equal boxes because the playing field isn't even in their community and the institutional barriers are uneven. The fence posts are uneven in the systems in which we're putting them. So this more robust definition of equity, if we want to sort of equate that with how many boxes does a young person need to have in order to see over the fence, is one that really has us have to simultaneously recognize we have to understand the support certain people need to have based on where they're coming from and their families and communities. We also need to be acutely aware of the institutional barriers that are baked in to make learning uneven for them in the places where we're sending them. And then I hope as an expanded learning field, if our goal is to really make sure that young people are prepared to be in the game and actually know that there are multiple games they could be in, our goal has to really be to take down the fences, as you said, so that they really are moving in. So that's sort of a long answer to how I think we can come to this table, but I really do think this is the moment in time in which we have a refreshed sort of walkthrough of the science that tells us why the things that we intuitively do are so important. I think we have, as you've done in California, a huge amount of effort that's been invested in not just having good intentions, but in having demonstrated quality and in having our own assessments of what quality looks like. And this is the time to bring that information into our school partners and really say, we need to be partners. This really is the moment.
Very powerful, Karen. I'm mindful of our friend Sean Ginwright's notion of trauma persistent environments.
Yes.
We're not talking about children who experience trauma. We're talking about children and families who have to navigate environments that are filled with persistent trauma. And that gets so much to what you said about the ground and the fence and being different. Karen, it's unfortunately, you have another big thing to do and on some national stage. And then you're going to come back to California and moderate a panel. And somehow I suspect you're not going to leave your chair, except for a little
Well, I
bit.
will probably leave it because I need to drink, but you know, the benefits of being virtual are that I can show up in lots of places and have these wonderful conversations. So it's been great to do this with you.
Yeah, I just want to say, in addition to my expanded learning role in California, I'm also co-leading the state's K-12 social emotional learning CASEL cross-state initiative planning process. And I would encourage everyone to take a good look into the transformative SEL. And by the way, Karen, thank you for your leadership and work on the Aspen Commission's work on academic and social emotional development. I know how hard you work to bring in youth development, youth assets, and youth voice. Everyone, let's give a shout. She can't hear you. She'll feel all that energy and love. Karen, such a great privilege to have you with us today. Thank you for your wisdom, your leadership, and we'll see you this afternoon.
I will be back. Thank you so much.
Karen, before you leave, just look in the chat. You can look in the chat and see all of the love that's coming your way.
I do see it and so appreciate it. And I look forward to coming back and being with this great panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And now I welcome to the virtual stage friend and colleague, Jeff Davis. There's Mr. Jeff Davis.
Hello, Michael.
Director of the California After School Network, which co-hosts, which obviously without this partnership, this event wouldn't happen. So thank you to you and your team. And a big shout out to Paige on your team, who's kind of the wizard behind the curtain today and for the last several months making all this happen. And to our planning team, we haven't taken a moment to, to experience what we just did with Karen. It takes a lot of magicians and a lot of wizards and a lot of really talented people behind the scenes. So Jeff and I are going to take the next like 12 minutes and do something I've certainly never done before. I've never experienced it being done in a conference before. And Jeff and I have decided that we're going to offer you a very intimate look inside our relationship and our interaction, in hopes that it could offer you something as a leader in the midst of COVID. When there are times when we're not our best, but the circumstances demand direction, leadership, vision. How do we navigate that? And I have a very personal, a dear mentor and friend said, Michael, you might want to share this story, because I was sharing with that person a moment of where I've grown as a leader in the midst of this COVID. So this has to deal with an interaction I had with Jeff around a very powerful movement that Jeff is leading around whole child health and expanded learning. Jeff, give us some context before we jump in.
Sure. It's really, Karen set all of this up because what she referred to in terms of integrated supports and community partnership is exactly what the Whole Child Health and Wellness Collaborative is trying to move forward. And as we heard, and as we know, and as we feel and experience in our work, we create the conditions necessary for children and youth to thrive. We create conditions where they can be physically healthy, socially and emotionally healthy, so that they can learn and thrive. We also know that we're helping to meet some critical needs like basic needs around nutrition and things of that nature. The other part of this is that we are serving the highest need communities in California. And what Karen referred to as integrated supports is really the vision of the Whole Child Health and Wellness Collaborative. If you have a state that has 4,500 expanded learning programs, and you know that they're already meeting the physical, social, and emotional needs of children and youth, what would it look like if we reached out into the community and we were able to network the health, the mental health, the social services? This notion really that is not a new vision. Some might say that it's the vision of community schools. But we have an opportunity in California to really help meet the needs of children, families, and communities. And that's really the bold vision of the Whole Child Health and Wellness Collaborative. But that's not the point of this conversation, right? The point of this conversation is all about each and every one of us, every single day, has important work. And Karen spoke about institutional barriers, and certainly there are institutional barriers. But the other part of that is that institutions are made up of people, right? And no matter what work we're talking about, and no matter who you are in terms of this summit, your work is very important, and it's magnified right now. And it's going to take all hands on deck, and it's really going to require folks to work together and collaborate to meet these needs.
All right, I'm going to step into it, Jeff. Level of vulnerability I haven't exercised. So maybe there's something some of you can identify with here, but there was a really important meeting. Jeff had built this incredible cross-sector body, and some of you on this panel have been part of this work. Incredible cross-sector, the best I've seen in my career. And there was a big meeting coming up, and Jeff had been communicating with me, is there a couple staff from the division that you could send to this meeting? You could send, and so I'm envisioning an important but smaller subset of a meeting of the larger work. And I got information about the meeting sent to me. I didn't get to it until way too late. Have you ever written a late night email you wish you might not have sent? This one was sent April 30th at 1:04 a.m. Hey, Jeff. And by the way, I managed to copy several people leading the work along with this. You can see where this is going to go. I know you've been persistent about getting staff from my office to be involved in the meeting this Friday. In my mind, I thought you were talking about a small committee. I was shocked when I opened the Google Doc and saw who was engaged to talk about the issues involved. You know, I've been buried in policy work, but I had no idea, blah, blah, blah. I would have cleared my schedule to be part of this. My absence of knowledge and scope of scaling of this meeting concerns me. Why was I not invited to the meeting and did not know the scope and scale of this meeting and work? We have a huge reset to accomplish. I know the last 7 weeks I've been working long days and all weekends, concerns and policy shifts during COVID-19. I might have missed an email or two. And I close with this beautiful phrase, I admit I'm a bit upset at this hour. And then I apparently felt better for the moment, shut my computer, finally went to sleep, and woke up the next morning. And within about 30 seconds of consciousness, I thought, oh crap, what did I just send to my dear brother Jeff? And then I knew that I had to pick up the phone. And I did. And I called. And Jeff picked up, and I was so grateful he did. And Jeff, you and I have spoken. I don't remember what I said, but I remember what I felt. And I remember feeling incredible humility, hat in hand, offering as authentic an apology as possible. Where were you when you received that phone call, and what was your morning like?
So April 30th was, still about a month in, a little over a month into shelter in place, and like many of you, right, that's just so challenging, right? My wife is part of the essential workforce. We have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we were balancing childcare. And so what we learned through that month and a half is get them out of the house as quickly as possible if you don't want everyone involved to go insane. So I'm out on a morning walk with my kids. I have not yet had an opportunity to check email, but my phone is blowing up with text messages indicating that there's something wrong. There's a disturbance in the force. And so I'm on my morning walk, trying to make sure that my kids aren't crossing the street without me making sure it's safe, and check the email. Obviously my heart sinks because, Michael, obviously you're somebody that I have a great deal of respect for, and somebody that is very important to the work. And, this notion that we would have missed something. And my knowledge was full and well, right, that you had been working. And by the way, thank you for all of your work that you've done for us to advocate for us in the halls of the governor's office and the highest levels of leadership at the department, to help folks understand the important role that expanded learning is playing. And I know that shaping all those new policies over nights and weekends was taking a lot of your time. And that's, of course, why I was asking for representation and not necessarily wanting to be another burden on your time. But yeah, so I was in that mind space of just not totally present, because I'm trying to have a conversation with you and address the issue while I'm also balancing childcare, probably not unfamiliar to many on the call.
So Jeff, we got about 2 minutes left, but I remember receiving grace and forgiveness from you. And I shortly after wrote a follow-up email, and I CC'd all the people I did on the first one. And I said, "Dear Jeff, thank you for taking my call and accepting my apology this morning. And to the group, my apology for a Leadership 101 failure. Jeff and I are good and reset. Bringing all of you into my heightened emotional state last evening was not professional, and I apologize. I felt it was important to send this message to all of you and let you know that Jeff and I are good, and our work for tomorrow's meeting is so critical." I want to say, Jeff, that we've never been stronger. And my love for you has never been more authentic and genuine. But one of the reasons I wanted to share this story is in recent days, I've witnessed people in the system reacting emotionally in ways I thought might not have been reasonable. And in part because of this experience, I have built more capacity in me to have compassion for others as you had compassion for me, Jeff, because we are never always our best selves. And to be able to be in relationship and to know, we all know this, in any relationship, there are missteps and meltdowns and miscommunications. How we respond to those is what rising together means. And I don't know what anyone might take from this story, but the one thing I know is everything Karen and I talked about was centered on showing up as our authentic selves with children, with other adults. And Jeff and I have learned how to show up with our authentic self together with each other on this journey, as is the case with so many whose names I see on this conference. With that, it's time, brother. Thank you. I love you. And I'm going to turn it back to you for a final brief comment and then take us to the next stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I hope that, I don't know what you got out of this either, but I hope that what you did get is that conflict is an essential part of our work. It leads to resolution, that we're all responsible of how we all show up, right? Only for ourselves. And that to hold compassion and to inquire with compassion in these moments, because the work is important. It's important enough to do that and to circle back and to ask our colleagues. So we are about to enter into a break period. Before the break, though, we want to show you a brief video about what is coming next. And what's coming next is a really sort of unique, modified open space type of opportunity. We're going to get to see the video before going to the break. And so let's just go ahead and roll that video now and let our participants know what's next. In a moment, you will have your opportunity to take control of your own learning, to be in community with your colleagues, to learn from one another, and to share the cool and innovative things that you're doing to meet this moment, and to explore how we rise together. This is also a time to communicate directly with the system of support. What are your needs in this unique moment? You have selected a topic area as part of your registration, and in a moment you will enter a virtual room. There, you will learn more about the dialogue that you will get to have and how to offer information that will help the system understand how to better support you. You might even call this data-driven continuous quality improvement, or CQI. But now back to Diego for a bit about showing up in this space.
Peace and blessings, y'all. Excited to be here, but even more excited to have this guy right here, Pepito, to help us guide us in the 4 different ways we can show up, or 4 different ways we can choose to show up. So with that, I wanted to give the floor over to my main man right here, Pepito. All right, take it away. 4 different ways we can show up, and one is the prisoner, and this is when you feel you don't have a choice. You're forced to be here because your boss or director like Diego says you have to attend this workshop or training. And then next, what do we have? The vacationer. Yes, this is not your workshop, it's not your training. You don't have to lead, you don't have to facilitate. You can just sip on your coffee and cruise. Because, hey, you're on vacation, right? But hey, what else do we have? Ah, yes, thank you, Pepito. The sophisticate, the person who's been there, done that, gone to this workshop, that workshop, has this certificate and that, and just wants to share a lot of what they learned, and just to be mindful of how we show up. And what else do we have? The last one is, yes, I am ready. I am ready. I don't care what it is, but I am ready. And what is the explorer but all the different ways of showing up in one? So it's a choice, y'all.
And so this will begin your break period. And when we come back at 10:15, you'll join your open space breakout session. The main piece to remember is to make your way back to that event schedule and locate the breakout session that you've selected, and then engage as Diego described. We'll see you back at 10:15.